I bought a Tapper colt at the Keeneland September sale and incredibly excited about that purchase. It was a colt that had plenty of size and scope and carried himself with a real presence that drew me to him.
I bought a Tapper colt out of Black Coronas at the Phasey Tipton July sale, out of a Curlin mare, big beautiful horse. We're real excited about him coming up in the spring.
Taprit, standing at Gainesway.
Hi everyone, David Aragona here for another edition of the TimeformUS Road to the Derby series presented by Gainesway, as Gainesway is presenting all of our Kentucky Derby prep coverage at the Daily Racing Form for this prep season. And this is the end of the road. This is the final chance for three-year-olds to accrue qualifying points for the Kentucky Derby. This will be the final installment of the TimeformUS Road to the Derby series before I actually preview the Kentucky Derby on that first week in May. This is the Grade 3 Lexington Stakes at Keeneland, race 9 on their card on Saturday at Keeneland, which also features the Grade 1 Jenny Wiley. That'll be the feature, but many eyes will be trained on this Lexington as there are 20 Kentucky Derby qualifying points on the line for the winner of this race, and many of the starters in this field already have 10 or 20 points in the bank, so those extra 20 points in the Lexington could potentially propel a few of these horses into that Kentucky Derby starting gate. Let's throw up the field for this race. We've got 11 runners signed on to compete on Saturday, and it's pretty wide open field. You got a lot of horses that have competed against some of the top players heading towards the Kentucky Derby. Many of these have not won Derby preps, but have finished on the board or gotten some minor points for some lower placings in those races. Among those are the number 2 In Due Time, who's listed at 3-1 on the morning line, and the number 9 Tawny Port, who's listed at 5-2 on the morning line. I would imagine they'll vie for favoritism in this race. In Due Time coming out of a second place finish in the Grade 2 Fountain of Youth. I believe he got 20 qualifying points for that race. Similar for Tawny Port, who's coming out of the Jeff Ruby Stakes. I think he already has enough points to be in the Derby field, but his connections are going to give him another spin over the dirt course here, as his one prior start over the dirt did result in an off-the-board finish in the Risen Star. But it's not just about those two horses. You could make a case for a lot of other runners in this race. We've got the one horse to beat the potential Derby favorite this year, Call Me Midnight, drawing towards the outside. He's listed at 6-1 on the morning line. Some other horses who are coming off good efforts in prep races like Ethereal Road and Dash Attack, who won a prep earlier in the year. They're also in this race. So pretty wide open Lexington field. And we'll see if any of these three-year-olds can make their way into the Kentucky Derby starting gate. Before we dissect the contenders, let's take a look at the TimeformUS pace projector for this Lexington. And the thing that I noticed when I look through this field is there is not a single confirmed front runner in this race. Nobody really is that comfortable racing on the lead, so you can kind of see it from the pace projector. There's a kind of bunched group towards the front end, and nobody is predicted to really establish themselves as the clear leader in this race. And I'm not that convinced that any of the horses that are shown towards the front end are actually going to be there. The number 2, In Due Time, has some tactical speed. You could say the same about the number 7, Major General, and the number 8, Strava. All of those horses had shown speed earlier in their careers in sprint races, but more recently in their route events have not really been a part of the paces. So we'll see if they adjust to the lack of pace in this Lexington and get some more aggressive rides. Some of the horses in behind them also have shown initiative on occasion, like the number 5 Howling Time, or the number 1 Midnight Chrome has a little bit of speed. So it's going to be interesting to see the way this race plays out. The one horse that could be really compromised if the pace is run at a crawl up front is the number 11 Call Me Midnight, because he just does not have much early speed at all. And breaking from the outside post position, I would imagine that he will be, or the pace projector predicts him to be, in last place heading into that opening turn. Let's make our way through some of the contenders in this race, beginning with one of those horses that could vie for favoritism, the number 2, In Due Time. And we'll take a look at his recent second place finish in the Fountain of Youth back in early March at Gulfstream Park. We're just going to take a look at basically the last furlong of this race, as there was a bit of an incident at the top of the stretch that this horse was arguably involved in, arguably caused, when he tried to bull his way out for some running room. This is, though, after that happened, as they're in deep stretch by this point, Simplification going on to an easy victory, and In Due Time closes to finish second in this race. Not really sure if there was that much of quality behind In Due Time in that Fountain of Youth. Obviously, Simplification was much the best in that race, and I thought In Due Time ran reasonably well. He did encounter some traffic around the far turn, but ultimately was no match for the winner. Got a decent 104 TimeformUS speed figure, nothing to write home about, but it certainly puts him in the mix for this race. I'm more intrigued as to why he didn't run in the Bluegrass last week. His connections had initially kind of targeted that or penciled it in as the next race on the schedule for him. They skipped the Bluegrass. They're instead running in this Lexington, I guess, to kind of target an easier spot. I'm not really sure that's a positive sign for this horse. The connection are saying they want to be able to get a win heading into the Derby. So even though it's only 20 points for the victory here, that's probably all he needs to get into the starting gate. So they're hoping to get a confidence booster in, and we'll see if they actually do have that much confidence about this horse's chances. Only had 3 workouts since the last race. I watched one of them, wasn't super impressed by it. So I think he can definitely win this race, and I think he's going to get the right kind of tactical trip. I'm just not really sure about the overall scheduling for this horse and why he's running in this race as opposed to another prep where he arguably would have been among the shorter prices. The other horse who figures to vie for favoritism in this Lexington is the number 9, Tawny Port. Let's take a look at his past performances. And he's coming off the highest last out TimeformUS speed figure of any runner in this field when he got a 119 Timeform number in the Jeff Ruby Stakes last time. Now, as you can see on the TimeformUS PPs, 3 of those running lines, including the Jeff Ruby, are color-coded in light blue. That indicates that all of those races were run over a synthetic track. And clearly he's a horse that does like that kind of going. He won his first 2 races on the synth, and he ran his best race ever last time in the Jeff Ruby, getting that 119 on the synthetic course at Turfway Park. Again, he was no match for Tiz the Bomb that day, who was just the best horse, but he did earn that really high speed figure that arguably makes him the horse to beat in here. I'm just not sure if I really think that he's better on the dirt or as good on the dirt, because watching the Risen Star 2 back, I thought he ran fine in that race, and that has come back as one of the stronger preps that we've seen throughout this season, with Epicenter, Smile Happy, Zand, and even 6th place finisher Slow Down Andy all guaranteed a spot in the Kentucky Derby starting gate from the Risen Star. Tawny Port, never really a threat to the top finishers that day, but there wasn't a whole lot of pace up front. Epicenter able to dominate that on the front end, and Tawny Port was finishing decently. But again, he's not a horse that possesses a ton of early speed. At the best, I think he's going to get a stalking trip in this Lexington, so we'll see if that suits him or not. And furthermore, I found a small sample stat for Brad Cox, his trainer. We can throw up this DRF formulator statistic. This is just not something that Brad Cox does that much. Running horses in graded stakes races off layoffs of less than 20 days. So this horse is coming back in just 2 weeks since the Jeff Ruby Stakes. He's just 0 for 6 over the past 5 years. The small sample size sticks out to me more than the fact that he hasn't had any winners. It's just not something that Brad Cox really does, wheeling horses back on short rest, and feels like they're getting a little desperate to get this horse the right kind of preparation heading into the Kentucky Derby. So I'm not really sure that I want to trust Tawny Port, though I do acknowledge he is a horse that is a viable win candidate in this race. Another horse that has positive experience in the Kentucky Derby preps is the number 4, Ethereal Road. Let's take a look at the race where he earned his point 2 back in the Grade 2 Rebel when he was second by a half length to Unoho. At the top of the stretch of this race, it looks like he has it won. He's ranging up outside of the tiring leaders, takes over, appears like he's going to draw off, but he just hangs a little bit in the late stages. You could see as they come past the 8th pole, he's starting to tire a little bit. The eventual winner is coming up the rail. That horse is just staying on, grinding away, and he's eventually going to get past Ethereal Road as they come onto the wire. And Ethereal Road's even about to get passed for second across the finish line by Barbara Road, who is always picking up pieces at the end of his races. Ethereal Road came back and tried the Grade 1 Bluegrass last week and just didn't fare that well. He did get a wide trip that day, lost some ground on the turn, but once again, I didn't like the way he finished off that race. He was ranging up like he was maybe going to mount a rally at the quarter pole, but really got to hanging on his wrong lead through the stretch, was losing momentum across the wire, beaten 11 lengths by some very good horses, but I think he's going to have to do better than that to be considered a contender in this Lexington. I know the 111 TimeformUS speed figure is supposed to put him in the mix, but I question whether this horse really wants to go farther than a mile. I know he broke his maiden going the mile and a 16th, but he really just ran for a half mile in that race. He's got a lot more sprint turf pedigree on the dam side, so I'm a little bit skeptical about whether 2 turns on the dirt is ultimately going to be what this horse wants to do down the line. So wanted to veer in a different direction here. Another horse that I think you have to consider is the number 11, Call Me Midnight. He was the one that I was mentioning could be somewhat compromised with regard to that pace projector, because even though the pace projector is not predicting that favors on or near the lead situation, I could see how the race might play out that way with so little speed signed on. And that's not going to work for Call Me Midnight's running style, because he is a deep, deep closer coming from far back in each of his last two races. It worked too back in the Lecomte when he got the job done, but that's because you see those red color-coded pace figures for the first couple of calls of that race. Epicenter, who was second that day, was forced to contest a very fast pace on that occasion, and it set it up for a closer like Call Me Midnight to pick him up in the late stages. The pace did not develop last time out when this horse tried the Louisiana Derby, going 1 mile and 3/16, and he loomed at the top of the stretch like he was going to mount a rally, but there just was not a whole lot of passing going on in that final quarter mile, as the leaders had plenty left in reserve by the time they got to the top of the stretch of the Louisiana Derby. So he really flattened out in the late stages of that race. I do like the turn back to 1 mile and 1/16 for this horse. I think shorter, a little bit shorter, is likely better for him. I just have trouble envisioning him working out the right trip in a compact field like this without those pace players that are going to set up his late run. Another horse who won a stakes race early in his career is the number 7, Major General. He did so as a 2-year-old when he won over the Churchill Downs surface in the Iroquois back in September of 2021. He's just made one start so far as a 3-year-old, and it was a pretty disappointing effort. Bet down to 4-1 in the Tampa Bay Derby. He was never a factor in that race. Broke slowly, kind of stumbling out of the starting gate, and he was far back all the way throughout and finished last of 10 in that spot. I just want to bring up Major General because he's listed at a relatively short price on the morning line in this race. He's 4-1. I'm not sure if he'll actually go off that short, but the reason that he might be interesting is because of his debut effort when he won in gate to wire fashion. And there aren't that many horses that have achieved positive results going to the lead, and he's one that has. So potentially his rider, Irad Ortiz, could get pretty aggressive with Major General and send him to the front end. Todd Pletcher is adding blinkers to Major General's equipment in this race, so potentially that's a signal that he's going to show more early speed. I don't really like this horse's form, and if he is anywhere near 4-1, I don't think that's great value on him, but I just want to highlight him as a potential pace player in this race. Another horse who achieved stake success earlier in this prep season is the number 10, Dash Attack. And let's take a look at his victory back from New Year's Day in the Smarty Jones at Oaklawn Park. He looked like he might be a player on the Kentucky Derby Trail for Ken McPeek going back these 3 months when he won this race in the slop. He makes a nice move off the far turn to take control of this race in the final furlong and wins by 2 lengths, looking like he's got something left in reserve across the wire. This was a pretty visually impressive win. The problem is he was unable to back it up in 2 subsequent starts over fast tracks. He moved up in class to Graded Stakes Company in the Southwest and then the Rebel, and was not particularly effective in either of those races. Got paced to close in the Southwest, couldn't launch a rally. Last time out, the pace was a little bit slower on the moderate side in the Rebel Stakes, and I thought David Cohen kind of buried him too far back in the pack, didn't really have him in the right position to make a run, but still, he didn't really lift his hooves and do any running on the stretch of that race. So I think the jury is kind of still out on where Dash Attack is from a form standpoint and whether he's continued to move forward since those promising races to start off his career. That said, he is getting Flavien Prat aboard for this race. I think that's a big rider upgrade. Ken McPeek tends to have some success in these graded stakes at Keeneland. He can strike with some prices, and I do think Dash Attack is going to be a decent set of odds in this race. So he is one that I would want to include, though I don't totally trust him to bounce back. Just think he's the kind of horse that might be able to inject some value into the exotics. I could say some of the same things about the number 1, Midnight Chrome, as we take a look at his past performances. Midnight Chrome has spent most of his career racing on the turf, and he really has not run a speed figure that makes him that competitive in this race. But I do want to highlight his lone recent dirt race was back in December of last year in the Grade 2 Remsen, and the 2 horses that he finished behind, Mo Donegal and Zandon, are considered 2 of the top contenders for the Kentucky Derby. Now, Midnight Chrome was nearly 10 lengths behind them in that Remsen and really was not in the same league as those horses. Also, he was right on top of a slow pace, so he had that working in his favor. But I didn't think that Midnight Chrome was totally outclassed that day. He was actually trying to quicken and go with those two superior horses at the 8th pole, just kind of got dropped in the final furlong as those two threw it down to the wire, and Midnight Chrome faded to finish third that day. The 95 TimeformUS speed figure, like I said, not going to get it done here, but this is the kind of horse that seemed like he missed some time. His last race on the turf at Gulfstream feels like it was purely a prep. I don't think that was the goal at all. He didn't show much speed in that race, broke a little bit slowly. It did do some running at the very end to get up for third. There are no pace figures showing, but that was a race that was dominated towards the front end. Not a whole lot of closing going on. It seemed like it was a useful prep that Midnight Chrome should move forward from. And I think it's interesting that Jose Ortiz is taking the mount on this horse for connections that you don't really think is having top 3-year-olds, at least not anymore. John Service, he was the trainer of 2004 Kentucky Derby winner Smarty Jones. But Midnight Chrome, I think he's going to take a big step forward off that turf prep last time. And this DRF formulator stat that I found kind of goes along those lines. John Service over the past 5 years, going from turf to dirt in route races, has great stats. 19 for 67. That's a 28% win rate with an ROI that's easily above $2. So Midnight Chrome, he's listed at 20-1 on the morning line, and I think he's going to be pretty close to that price in this race, even though he's got that live rider and Jose Ortiz aboard. And I'm kind of hoping that he gets the kind of aggressive ride that he did in the Remsen 2 back, because the early pace is kind of there for the taking. Whoever wants the lead can get it. And breaking from the inside, you'd imagine they'll try to secure that position and be aggressive with this horse. I have no idea if Midnight Chrome is good enough, but as we throw out my picks for this race, you can see I didn't want the favorite, so I'm going to take a shot with this long shot. I put Midnight Chrome on top, again, hoping for that big price somewhere in the 15, 20-1 range, maybe higher than that. I've got some of those logical contenders also in there. The number 2, In Due Time, who I would probably say is the most likely winner. Just don't totally trust his form coming into this race and why he's running here. 20 Port, who has to prove that he handles the dirt. Again, Brad Cox, always dangerous, but I feel like he could be a bit of an underlay. And that number 10 Dash Attack, who's getting that big rider switch to Flavian Pratt. Don't want to totally dismiss him, but this Lexington does feel like the kind of race where you can shop for some value if you like a horse at a bigger price than the favorites. So that's a look at the final Kentucky Derby prep of this prep season, the Grade 3 Lexington on Saturday at Keeneland. Good luck if you're playing this weekend, and thanks to Gainesway for presenting this video.